With Mythic Plus testing now available on the public test realm for the upcoming patch Guardians of the Dream, I figured this would be the perfect time to dive into the Guardian Druid class to see how the newest tier set's going to interact with the spec with a focus on Mythic Plus. Let's just dive into this one. Starting with the 2-set bonus, it reads 20% of your damage and healing and 100% of the armor that you gain during Rage of the Sleeper fuel the growth of the Dream Thorns, which refuel in their protection after Rage of the Sleeper expires, absorbing 10% of the damage dealt to you while the thorns remain. First things first, this will require you to play Rage of the Sleeper. Luckily, the latest rework to the tree allows Rage of the Sleeper to be picked up from 3 separate talents. Most likely, you're going to be able to grab it through Incarnation, but there are other options. Once you use Rage of the Sleeper, you're going to start building value on a secondary buff called Dream Thorns. You'll build the size of the absorb by simply dealing damage, healing, and of course gaining armor through Iron Fur. There is a lot of potential here when we look at the class tree. First, we have talents like Reinforced Fur that will actually increase the amount of armor that we're going to gain per Iron Fur use. This will also bolster the size of the shield. Similarly, talents like After the Wildfire and Elun's Favored can allow a portion of the healing to add to the shield as well. We're going to dive into talents more or less in a bit, but let's just jump over to the 4-set bonus. This one reads, for every 40 rage you spend while Rage of the Sleeper is active, extends its duration by 1 second, up to 5. Your Dream Thorns become Blazing Thorns, causing 10% of the damage absorbed to be reflected at the attacker. Doing some quick girl math, we can easily find that we have to spend 200 rage over 10 to 12 seconds in order to maximize the duration of Rage of the Sleeper. This by itself is actually pretty strong, since Rage of the Sleeper is a pretty sizable 25% damage reduction and is accompanied with a 15% damage increase. On top of all of that, you're also going to be getting 25% leech during its duration, which is just extremely valuable. Especially since the healing now builds into Blazing Thorns buff. This should actually now push Rage of the Sleeper from about an 18% uptime to about 25%, which is massive. So let's quickly take a look at the Blazing Thorns buff. When we approach 5 target dummies in Valdrakken and use Rage of the Sleeper with a standard priority rotation, we can see first that Rage of the Sleeper is extended to 15 seconds pretty easily, and then the Blazing Thorn buff is able to hit about a 460k absorb. This is a pretty sizable shield. Speaking of the shield, this can only ever absorb 10% of each attack, so in essence, it's about a 10% damage reduction while the shield persists. Now, of course, there is a caveat to this. For those who don't know, there is a priority system when it comes to absorbs and how they mitigate attacks. If you happen to be playing Ursac's Fury, which is a pretty standardized talent in today's meta, that shield is actually going to take precedence over the Blazing Thorns buff, which means that, well, if your Ursac's absorb is outvaluing the damage that you're actually taking, Blazing Thorns is essentially worthless. This is more concerning in AoE than single target due to Thrash being uncapped, raise procs, high rage generation, and of course Incarnation as a cooldown. But before I really dive into that, I do want to talk about some of the talents. So there are a lot of potential builds, or I guess talents, that would work with this set, but I feel like I need to say this is kind of difficult to address since the tier set changes in value based on the level of content the player is actually partaking in. In higher end content, this isn't really as much of the case since there's a higher level of damage intake per second, but let's talk about some of the different thought processes that I had while testing. First, spending rage and gaining armor tends to build the Blazing Thorns buff the fastest, at least in a moderately sized pool. This instills some additional value into talents like Layered Mane and Reinforced Fur due to the additional stacks as well as the increased armor value. If we feel like Ursac's Fury might not be worth due to clashing with the tier set, talents like Galactic Guardian, Fury of Nature, and Elun's Favored will actually provide additional damage and healing, meaning that this set actually has a little bit of synergy with the Galactic Guardian playstyle that a lot of players actually fell in love with during Season 1. It's hard to say what's actually going to be the preferred build since it's really early in the PTR cycle. I've only really done a handful of keys in the plus 20 range, but I will be doing another video closer to once the patch comes out, once I'm able to have access to more data and have a chance to play with additional builds. So piggybacking off of that, I want to talk about my concerns with the set, or I guess just pros and cons more or less. So I'm a little torn, if I'm being honest. Similar to the Protection Warrior, being forced into a very specific talent just feels bad. I mean, while Rage of the Sleeper is great and the majority of players actually use it, I am aware that there are players who just don't, because that's the beauty of the talent trees, is the idea of choice. I will say this though, Rage of the Sleeper is a very powerful cooldown, and this set increases its uptime by quite a considerable margin, which is extremely strong due to the increased damage, leech, and of course the damage reduction that it provides. Alongside that, the additional Blazing Thorns buff actually smooths out the damage taken profile. Once things like Incarnation end and of course Rage of the Sleeper, the 10% absorb helps kind of smooth out the damage taken from auto attacks, magical attacks, and of course damage over time effects alike. The Blazing Thorns buff actually becomes a little bolstered in a way, since every other use is typically paired with Incarn, and of course we all know how powerful it is in large pools. While these things are great, I do think that there's a downside or two of this set. Besides this forcing a talent choice of Rage of the Sleeper, which really isn't that big of a deal, the major concern I have with this set is what I pointed out earlier, in terms of the priority system with absorbs feeling somewhat strange. Now, personally, I'm a player who typically finds myself pushing Mythic Raid and higher end keys, and in that case, this tier set actually isn't too shabby. But when testing lower level keys, the damage falls off pretty hard from the set bonus, and the Blazing Thorns buff just more often than not goes unused, especially after using Incarnation. In a single target encounter, especially in Raid, this set bonus then again loses additional value since you're not necessarily always having uptime on the boss because you might be off tanking, or there's certain types of spell queuing. Long story short, this set has some interesting caveats that tend to cater to higher end level of play. While this may keep Guardian Druids competitive in high-end Mythic Plus, I would say that the average player may find this set as a little bit underwhelming. There isn't much you can do to optimize this set either, besides playing potentially a suboptimal build, which isn't fun either, hence why I kind of feel strange about this set. I'm not really sure how they could fix it. My original thought is that they can maybe change the absorb priority, but I don't think that will really fix the issue because then Ursoc's Fury becomes more or less irrelevant and it'll become quickly capped since it can only be the size of about 30% of the Guardian Druid's health pool. The other option I thought of is to instead make it a damage reduction instead of being an absorb. And maybe it's just until you take X amount of damage. This would retain Ursoc's Fury's value, while also providing a DR for up to the 30-second duration or until the buff is completely absorbed, or used up, I guess. Anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like I said, I will be back again with this class once I'm able to do a little bit more testing. And of course, a massive shout out to all my Patreon supporters. I just appreciate you guys so much. I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.